Hey y'all, it's Deanna. Welcome back to Feed Me the Facts. Before we jump into today's episode, I just wanted to give you a little bit of the inside scoop of what's happening in the Diversified Dietetics community. The biggest thing is our annual summit. It's our conference that we do every year. This year it's virtual, but there will be meetups happening across the country for you to connect with people in real life. Also going to do a watch party in New York, so more details to come on that. But the summit is just a time to really learn and grow and professionally develop. The speakers are amazing. You have to check out the lineup on our website, Diversified.Dietetics.org. They just have such interesting topics, really doing amazing work, and you get to learn firsthand from them about what cultural humility looks like in action and go deep on just how to make an impact in communities that many of us are a part of. So check that out. Then, to tell you a little bit about today's episode, I'm excited that we have Dr. Navika Gangrade on, and we're diving into the world of research and academia. If you've ever wondered for yourself, what does it take to get a PhD in nutrition? What does it look like? Is it worth it? Will I be able to advance in the ways that I think I may be able to? Is it worth it from the money front? What does it even look like to get paid during these programs? How do you navigate this space as a person of color? Because we know academia is another space that just needs more diversity and equity and inclusion. So is an advanced degree for you? And I hope that this conversation really gives you some insight into that. So let's get into it.
Welcome to Feed Me the Facts, the podcast dedicated to representation and inspiration for students and professionals of color pursuing careers in nutrition and dietetics. I'm Deanna Lewis, registered dietitian and co-founder of Diversified Dietetics. Every episode will bring you expert insights, the latest trends, and personal stories that inspire. Whether you're new to the field or a seasoned pro, this is your space to learn, grow, and connect.
Hey everyone, welcome to Feed Me the Facts. I am so excited to be joined by Navika today, who is a PhD dietitian. I guess I should call you Dr. Navika.
No, please.
Is a visiting assistant professor in the nutrition program at NYU Steinhardt, Department of Nutrition and Food Studies. She earned her PhD in nutrition and registered dietitian credentials from Cornell University and her BS in dietetics from the University of Delaware. That's her on paper bio, but I got to meet Navika, maybe like a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, but she reached out to Diversified Dietetics with a cool opportunity to help with getting some of our mentor program research published. And so got a chance to work with her through that opportunity and loop her into the mentor program. And it's just been amazing resource to have with this additional PhD, background. So I thought, who better to talk to about what it looks like to get a PhD, to explore academia, to be in research than her. So welcome, Navika. Please feel free to introduce yourself and share a little bit more.
Aw, thanks, Deanna, for the introduction. It's been so fun. I feel like time has gone by so quick. I'm like, when did we first meet? I really think it was 3 years ago at this point.
No, a year.
No, I'm afraid that's actually wrong. I'm also wrong. I think it's
maybe two.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I know. Time has gone by so fast, but yeah, I'm Navika Gangrade, and I am both a visiting assistant professor, just professor at NYU right now in their nutrition department, as Deanna said, and I also am a registered dietitian, and I work in private practice too and see a few clients to, keep engaged in clinical work, and I love that as well. So super excited to be here and talk through all that is nutrition, PhD world, academia, etc.
Love it. Well, thank you. And can you take us a little bit further back in your journey? Tell us about your RD journey, what you did prior to pursuing your PhD, and how that whole path has been to get you where you are now.
Yeah. So honestly, if it's okay, I feel like it's best to start childhood.
Yeah, I love it.
I always, and everyone probably says this, love food. My family is half Indian, half Chinese, and my parents immigrated to America. So food, as with many immigrant families, is the way to keep you just embedded and close to your culture. So everything was about food. Actually, my partner now jokes my family only talks about food. That is 100% of our conversation because we just love food. So it was always, food was always a thing, but nutrition, dietetics wasn't, in the sense of I didn't know what a nutritionist was growing up. I didn't even know what a I didn't even think the word dietitian existed until it must have been my senior year of high school, which maybe is actually earlier for than many other folks. I know that's still not super prominently talked about in high school, but my high school had the option to take online courses from a local, not a local college, the college I went to, which is like so random now that I think about it. But I was like, let me just sign up for nutrition. And this was totally random my senior year because I was super pre-law. I was like, I'm going to be
Okay,
a
I was
lawyer.
curious, yeah, where you were gonna go. Yeah.
Yes. I love
Ah.
yapping. I feel like all the lawyers are like, what are you talking about? But I love yapping, doing some arguing. So I was like, that was what I really want to do, be a lawyer. I took that course and I was like, whoa, you
Mm.
can just talk about food. Like that is a career path. Like you can just be immersed in food. And my professor at that time was, I felt relatively inclusive. Like she brought in like tofu. I
Mm.
just remember learning these things and being like, oh, this is so crazy. I can't believe I'm in quote unquote class, like learning about tofu. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this is sick. I like this. And I just changed all my apps to nutrition just on a whim. I was like, is this a real thing in all these colleges? And ended up applying. Not really, I would say, with like a super firm idea of what I wanted to do after, but I just was really into the idea that I could just like talk about food and learn about food more. Yeah.
I love
Yeah, that
that.
was kind of the initial journey.
Yeah. I just I love that you were like, you love to yap, and then you realize that you could, like, talk about food. Like, you could just have to just be
Yeah.
a lawyer. You could, like, merge all of your passions into one thing. And so you then pursued nutrition at the undergraduate level, and what motivated you to go for a PhD? Because I feel like that's, like, a lot more school than just, like,
Yes.
undergraduate nutrition.
Yes. Well, first, I just want to acknowledge the privilege. My dad actually moved to America to get his PhD. So I
Mm.
had like heard of that, heard of a PhD.
Right.
And I just think that's so profound to have like role models and mentors that, have achieved similar things education wise, career wise as you. So I just had that as in my ether, let's say. But I got involved in nutrition research at the University of Delaware where I did my undergrad. And it was the coolest thing ever. So just tell you about one research study that I feel
Yeah.
like was just something where I was like, research is awesome. And now I'm like thinking about it. I'm not even sure if this is like, I'm sure I've changed certain parts about the study now. So I'm sure if that professor is listening, she's like, what are you talking about? But from what I remember, I was an undergraduate research assistant in this lab that looked at social connection and diet or like food choices and behaviors. And it was actually in a psych department, which was super cool too. So I was like, wow, food is like everywhere. So it was in
Mhm.
the psych department. And what one of the studies that this professor was running would bring in partners, so couples, and have them sort of get into a fight. So
Oh my
they
gosh,
were
the tea.
purposely yes, and there was, of course, like, it passed all the ethical requirements and everything, so it wasn't, like, ruining the relationship, but, like, had them get a little agitated, and then she would look at their food choices after, so we would have them go into, like, a room that was a food buffet set up and look at the different food choices that they picked out after feeling maybe, like, slighted by their partner. And we, like, were able to watch it from a camera, and I just remember being like, "This is so cool. This is so interesting. It's answering such an interesting question." I don't know, you just really get to design something for yourself, and ultimately, the information from that is gonna help a lot of people. It's gonna help
Mhm.
policy, it's gonna help education system, like, so many different things. So I was like, "Okay, not only is this really cool, it's also helpful
Yeah.
research." So at that point, I was like, okay, I'm into research. I did not know what a PhD was. I graduated, I was like a young for age kind of student. So I was 21 when I graduated. So that means I was about like 19 or 20 when I applied. Like,
Mhm.
I still can't believe I made that decision to like
Wow.
take 5 years of my life to do that. Yeah, at like 19, 20. So I don't think I knew what it was, but one, I knew I loved research. My dad did research, so I was like, okay, dad does this. I
Mhm.
like this. Let's just try.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you went directly f so you when you applied,
Mhm.
it was after undergrad, and it was, like, a PhD program that you applied directly into?
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, and I just fact checked this morning. It was that it still exists, but it was Cornell's PhD-RD program. So
Oh.
they combined the PhD with an RD, which is, I mean, more common now because there's a lot of MSRD programs. But I know
Yep.
when you and I were becoming dietitians, you didn't have to have the graduate degree. So a lot of these like dual programs were a lot less common.
Yeah. A
Hmm.
PhD RD. So you didn't even have to get a master's in between. Like it all was like lumped into this one PhD
Yeah.
RD program.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And was there a focus on the PhD program or it was like just a broader, just like broad?
I feel like I'm trying to think if there or most programs have focuses or not. To answer your question, yes. My program had like 4 different categories. You could do molecular nutrition, human nutrition, international nutrition, or community nutrition. And I did my PhD. I mean, my degree says nutrition, but my focus was community nutrition. So, in other words, like public health nutrition.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm so glad I asked that question because I had no idea that that was even an option to be able to
Yeah.
do that dual degree program like that. Like you said, more prevalent now since there's a requirement for a higher degree for dietitians specifically. But I also appreciate hearing about your dad and like the representation that he was for you to be able to be like, oh, this PhD thing exists and doing research exists. What's his PhD in?
It's in pharmaceuticals or like pharmacokinetics or something. So, not related at all, but like,
Yeah.
even just like seeing, I remember his dissertation was like on our bookshelf growing up, and we'd
How
be like,
cool.
what is that? And he'd be like, just all good.
So
Don't worry about it.
when you got in, was he like, "Are you sure you wanna do this? This
Oh,
is gonna take your life over."
100%. And I think it's just it was such a different dynamic for him than like it is like it was a lifeline, for immigrants to have a graduate degree, be able to be in the US and not citizens at that time. So it almost like wasn't, I mean, it was a choice, of course, but it was a different sort of like it had more gravity or a different type of gravity than it is for me. Like I felt like I was very privileged in being able to figure out what I wanted to do, going into a program where you don't get paid that much for 5 years, and yeah, so he definitely was like, "Just making sure."
Even when you said 5 years, I was like, "Oh, whoa." I mean, I've heard that these PhD programs last around that length, but just to, like, picture somebody who, like, starts out in their early 20s, ends when they're, like, towards the end of their 20s is like, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
commitment. But I think what's so interesting about research is you talked about the specific experience of studying couples. Like, there's so many specific niches that
Mm.
people are studying and the impact that that has down the line. So, like you said, using it for policy purposes or for planning programs. But I would have never guessed that there's a study going on where you put some tension between couples and then see what they eat after. That's so interesting. The dynamic is also an interesting piece, I think, from my external perspective, looking at research in academia. And I don't know if it's okay to use those words interchangeably. So please, like, correct me if I'm wrong, if those can be interchanged. But as a person of color, in the ways that I've seen academia discussed, it's sometimes seen as, the ivory tower. There's a lot of microaggressions, discrimination, issues that happen in these spaces because they are predominantly white and have been for a while. And there's a lot of, working your way up or having to like earn where you are in the research landscape. So can you just tell me, as a person of color, how you've navigated this academic and research landscape, the challenges that you saw, if any of those biases that I have about academia are true, or what that looks like for you?
How long you got? It is, oh my gosh, it's such a complex topic. To first answer your question, yeah, I kinda use academia and research interchangeably too. When you asked that, I was like, "Is that right?" I've been doing that too, so let's just say it is. I think the biggest thing for navigating these spaces, which is true. There is a historical lack of inclusion and representation for BIPOC folks and people of color in academia. And I mean, there is overt, covert racism that creates those systems even today,
Yeah.
where, like you said, microaggressions and things that are barriers to, people like us joining these programs and graduating from these programs too. So I want to say that because it's a process and there are barriers to retention in these programs. I would say the biggest thing that helped me and something I'm super passionate about, which is kind of like our work together, mentorship. I think for me, having an amazing mentor. So The academic system is interesting because when you start a PhD, you have a built-in mentor. So you have to have a mentor to do a PhD because that person will mentor you in your research project, and so on and so forth. And this person is called your principal investigator, or basically your
Mhm.
like committee chair. There's a lot of different words, but there's one person that you apply to work with, and then they choose you too. So you have a built-in mentor. And that can be tricky for a few reasons. One, this built-in mentor is your mentor for 5+ years, and they are the person that's closest to you. But they're also the person that determines if you finish the program or not. So
Mm.
I lucked out and I had an amazing mentor. She was a woman of color. She was a Black woman. She is. And she supported me and just gave me a look behind the curtain in a way that I feel like someone that wasn't a person of color might not have thought of the things that would be important for me to know about. So I had a really good experience, but I think what is difficult to kind of speak towards the systems that are in place is that you have that one mentor who determines if you get a PhD or not, basically. And that's not completely true in the sense of like, well, I don't know. I've heard stories where people are like, their mentor just didn't like them or they didn't get
Oh,
along and they
wow.
kind of pushed them out. You also have a committee. So
Mhm.
because it does sound crazy that one person is the only person giving input on your work, your research, your ideas, they've built it in that there is a committee, and you have usually 4 people on this committee, including that primary mentor or that principal investigator that will help mentor you through your work. So in that way, you can
Mm.
have some other people giving their say. But I will also acknowledge the fact that your primary mentor is the most important, quote unquote, and everyone sort of cedes to them. So you can imagine if you have quote unquote toxic mentor, that's a really horrible 5 years. And I've just
Yeah.
heard a lot of different stories. So what I'd always recommend upcoming students is even if your primary mentor is not going to be like your ride or die, as it was for me, find the person that will be. Or better
Yeah.
yet, university systems should create scaffolding so people can find their ride or die mentor
Mhm.
or a system of mentors or something, which I feel like is not super often done. But I'm going off on like a million tangents, but finding a mentor was so important in navigating that space.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that you hit on both individual, organizational, and systemic changes that can happen to better support people of color in this space where it's
Yeah.
find that community, find that person, that mentorship that will support you. Like organizations should do a better job at trying to have that as an opportunity for people to find the right fit. Cause I imagine maybe it's not something you know immediately off the bat that
Yeah.
this relationship will work. And then right, same thing on the systems level. And so do you come in with your research idea and that kind of molds and change as you talk with your mentor? Did you come in with, oh no, I want to study this? Or did that kind of shift and change? And what did you end up studying? Or what's your dissertation that's sitting on the counter or sitting on your shelf entail?
Yes, good question. So, in your application, you kind of have to pitch an idea, and it's always helpful to have something that if you're applying to work with a specific person, they, focus on diabetes. You want to pitch something that's in line with that, not totally in terms of like food waste or something. I'm trying to think of a totally different topic. It's always helpful to pitch something in line with what the person you're looking to work with has a research interest as well. That being said, I feel like what you pitch is oftentimes is not what you end up doing your dissertation on because one, you learn so much. The experiences you have when you're starting off or the experiences, not even the classes, but just the other sort of research projects that your mentor has that they expose you to will really modify what you think you want to do with 5 years of your life and what you think is really important. So that definitely happened for me. I think I came in wanting to study, which I still think is really cool, urban gardens and their
Ah,
impact on community health, especially in the neighboring community, even if the community members aren't working on the urban farm. Because I know sometimes there is also that disconnect between spaces and the communities. But anyway, I pitched and I ended up doing something really different. So I created a advocacy program for teens at a Boys and Girls Club in New York City. And in this program, I learned along the way that the system of academia is research and programming in academia in Black and brown communities. There's like a fraught relationship with that.
yeah.
And I oftentimes feel like It's researchers coming in and saying, hey, this is what you need to do to better your health because you
Yeah.
obviously don't know, which is so false. So I really learned about the process of people feeling empowered about their own health and using their own wisdom and their own lived experiences feeling empowered to use those own lived experiences to enact things that feel healthy for them. So for me, that kind of looked like, or what that ended up looking like was a program where youth would sort of just survey their own communities and just see what are some things that make it hard for them to feel good about food in their own community. And I think we all have this. If we look around, I'm like, the grocery store is just one block too far. I live in New York City. So, it's
Yeah.
just one block too far. And just all these things. So, like when I go in the grocery store, I had someone say, I'm allergic to cats, and there's always a bodega cat in there at this one. So I have to go to the
Mm.
one that's a little further away. So, anyways, we had youth go in their own community and do the same thing. And they found really profound things. Some of the things I mentioned, but also things like, why is coconut water $5, but Arizona $1 for double the size? Or, why is the marketing on the fridges always grab a Pepsi that looks nice and refreshing and not like grab, I don't know, something else that I would want or would make me feel better and the Pepsi
Yeah.
doesn't. And so they highlighted a bunch of these things. One of the really interesting things that they highlighted too was in New York, there's always these, or not always, but in a lot of communities, these fresh fruit, like I guess vendors or aunties basically selling cut up fresh fruit, like either at the subway or like at like busy areas. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I had them also pitch solutions. So they were
Yeah.
like, what if these aunties were in the bodega and we could just get fresh fruit really easily because not all bodegas and delis or convenience stores have these sort of things. So after they surveyed their community, they came up with solutions for some of the things that they wanted improved. And as part of the program that I created, I brought in some policymakers from the local community and I had the teens pitch some of their solutions to the
Wow.
policymakers. So my kind of hypothesis was that them going through this process would not only hopefully change the environmental factors, like maybe some of the policymakers heard this and there can be sort of, different, just have it in their back of their mind that a teen said this to me one day. So maybe there can be environmental changes to nutrition. But I also thought the individual empowerment that you receive from being like, this is my community, this is what it needs. And that can also promote wellness in ways that maybe are like are less tangible, maybe right in that moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, that ended up being, of course, there was research and we did kind of, we talked to the teens and maybe did a couple of surveys here and there to learn more about their experience. That was the research aspect, but creating that program was really the foundation of the project, the dissertation.
That's so cool and so practical. And I think, I'm glad you brought up that piece about research and the relationship that it has, especially with Black and Brown communities where it is so extractive and it is so like, hey, we need this from you for our benefit. No consideration about if it does benefit you. Because it can, yeah, can sometimes feel very weight savory the way that research is done. But that sounds like an approach that was centered in communities' needs and using youth to engage with policymakers is such a cool idea. I remember back in like public health school days, the continuum of community engagement. It's like you can just inform them, you can consult them, you can involve, there's collaboration. And then the ultimate goal was this empowerment. And I know folks may not love the empowerment term, but just having the solutions and the what you actually are focusing on come from the community. And then they're leveraging the strengths and the relationships and all the beneficial things that you have to kind of complement that work that they're already doing or could be doing if they would just have the resources and you were that tie into the resources. So that is really cool. And I think an example of also how you worked with DD, where you were like, hey, what are you interested in? I can support. So thank you for highlighting that research methodology and what that looks like practically. The season of Feed Me the Facts is focused on money and respect because it's a topic so many people are interested in hearing more about, wanting to advocate for nutrition professionals to have more respect, to have the ability to earn more. And sometimes advanced degrees are a way that, people talk about this like respect and maybe potentially more money. So that do you feel though that having the PhD has shifted your experience of being respected or being heard as someone who's a dietitian or that's a nutrition professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the short answer is yes. And I think there's a caveat to the field of nutrition specifically. Because I think still the career of a dietitian or the word dietitian is just isn't as well known as I'd love it to be. Even a nutritionist, I know that can be kind of taken in many different ways by many
Yeah.
different people. So I think it's hard when you say like, oh, I'm a dietitian, one, because people might not have heard that term ever before, or they might be like, oh, well, I follow someone who's a nutritionist and did you go to school for that or something? There's always these other questions. And I think the PhD is, since it goes through so many different fields, or obviously there's PhDs in so many different fields, it's more common and more heard of. I definitely think people are like, oh, okay, so this person did school, even though so did us dietitians,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
people that don't have PhDs did the nutrition school too. So, yes, I think in that sense, but I will say, like, just as every person has their own values and personality and things that they bring into their career, not all people with their PhDs in nutrition or any field are end all be all and like the
Mm.
stamp of I deserve respect because I did an extra 5 years of school. Like, no, I can tell you a ton about youth advocacy, but I don't know a lot about, I don't know, another topic in nutrition that and someone who didn't do their PhD might know a lot more about too. So I just want to highlight that too and bring in the values part. I have my values on like working in certain communities and doing certain work, but other people with PhDs might not. And that just maybe might just it I guess impacts how they deliver information or how they speak or what they do. So yeah, hopefully that wasn't too abstract, but
No, 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 that
sense.
makes a lot of sense, and I feel like that is definition culture humility, just, recognizing that everybody brings value and that centering that lived experience or highlighting, again, the assets that you have. It's not all of it is valuable, all of it should be given respect. But yeah, I think there's also that kind of air to somebody that has that PhD after their name where you're like, "Oh my gosh, doctor, like, I
Yeah.
need to," like, literally when today I was like, "Oh my gosh, I should not just call her Navika, like, she is Doctor Gangrade." Like, so yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. And I totally hear you on the nutrition dietetics piece, people still not really knowing
Mm,
what that means. Just this week, someone was just like, "What is dietetics?" Or
right.
sometimes when I wear my diversified dietetics t-shirt, they'll be like, "You're diversifying diabetics?" And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no."
That's so
Yeah, it's
good.
like we need a different name that's, like, separate from nutritionist because that, like you said, has
Yes.
been used in other ways.
I actually did at NYU, there was like a college career program for high schoolers. And I think it was like 10th to 12th graders. And they were
Mm.
highlighting different health professions. And they asked me to come speak, and another colleague actually, in a different session to speak about registered dietitians. And people were like, "What is a registered dietitian?" But they were so engaged the whole
Mm.
time. They were rapid fire nutrition questions, career questions. And how would you interact with the patient that comes in with this and this, but doesn't,
Wow.
and I think they're really in tune with what's been talked about nutrition on social media. And
Yep.
they're kind of hearing a lot of inclusive perspectives that maybe we didn't hear when we were in our training. So, what if someone doesn't want to pursue intentional weight loss? Like, what if
I
someone
love that.
wants to eat certain foods from their cultural background and doesn't want to
Yeah.
stick to a certain prescribed diet or, quote unquote, that like someone is saying they have to stick to a T or whatever. And I don't mean like, you shouldn't eat foods that are going to promote your own health, but you can eat the foods that you grew up with and all those sorts of
Yeah.
things. So they were so intrigued in it. And they were telling me this is the first time anyone has talked to them about anything in this realm. And they're getting a lot of their information from TikTok. And fortunately, they were asking me about this one influencer who I'm sure. Are you smiling because you know what I'm talking about?
No, no, I'm like,
Okay,
I
yeah.
love TikTok, but I had no idea who's the
Oh my
influencer.
God, I'm
What do they
addicted to
do?
TikTok. There's this one influencer who posts what I eat in a day to stay
Yeah.
skinny. And the students were just having a really hard time, like, conceptualizing that. They were like, "Do you think she only eats that?" It was
Mm.
kinda, like, heartbreaking in a way where they were comparing their own world. And also, I should add that these are all Black and brown students to this I think it's important, a white woman talking about what I eat to stay skinny, and it was just, like, this is the exposure that they have to nutrition,
Yeah.
and I would love it for it to be us, you
Yes,
know?
totally. The future of the field, despite a lot of changes and wanting it to be better, what folks are getting exposed to and the interest around topics around nutrition is really interesting to me. And I feel like you
Mhm.
said, the conversations that people are having were not ones that we were having when we were in school. And so the potential for things to just be so much more, inclusive and shift, and that coupled with the accessibility that social media provides is sometimes a downfall because obviously you're having to consume content like that at a young age for the youth specifically. But there's so much opportunity in elevating the voices of dietitians of color, nutrition professionals of color, lactation consultants of color, people that are in this nutrition professional space that have information that is not doing harm to adolescent growth. But also, I can only imagine how hard it is having all of those messages at that time in life where your body's changing. There's so much social pressure.
Totally.
It's so tough, but cool that you've gotten to work with youth so closely in your career.
Yeah, I love it.
So on the money side of the money and respect things, I would love to know, what's the financial outlook for somebody who gets their PhD? Is there a way to leverage that expertise and those credentials to increase your earning potential? Is it is it worth it on the financial side of things?
Love this question. I feel like I feel like people rarely talk about it, especially with like the PhD added to it. I think we're like becoming there's more talk about it, like, dietitians in general. But the PhD, I think, adds an interesting dynamic. Do you mind if I start kind of like in grad school just to
Oh my
like the
gosh,
money is
yes.
conversation there? Okay,
Do
cool.
it.
So when you're in doing your PhD, something that well, I'm not sure if it's super well known, but maybe it is you actually get your tuition paid for in some programs. So in my experience, my program paid for 100% of my tuitions. That was any classes I took to be a Cornell grad student, like all that kind of stuff was paid for. And then they paid a stipend on top of that. And
Oh.
that stipend was a fall and spring stipend, but no money during the summer, unless your primary mentor, your principal investigator says, I will pay from my startup funds, which Cornell gives me to start up my lab, your summer salary. So it's very interesting. So what that amounted to over each year was it actually increased each year, which was really great. $32,000 to, I think when I left, it was like $38,000. And that was a few years ago. And luckily, I lived in a really low cost of living. I lived upstate New York. I didn't save money during my PhD, but I was able to live, which is not the case oftentimes. Like there are PhD student like unions forming and rallies because they're not paid livable wages. So I will say other people's experience in PhD programs, some of them are not fully funded. So some of them might not pay full tuition, and then they might not give as high of a stipend or a stipend at all. So there's definitely iterations of that. I think I had a really good, not like deal isn't the right word, but I had a really good setup. But I just want to highlight to listeners, there's just a whole host of combinations that you could have. It's very rarely everything out of pocket and no stipend coming in. So that's the first 5 years, 5+ years, because I have
Yeah.
some friends that did like 6, 7 years, which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. I mean, I loved it, but it's crazy when you think about it after you're out of it. You're like, how was I okay with that?
Yeah. It's a long time.
Yeah. And then afterwards, there's a lot of different paths you can go. You could do academia. So that's staying in the university system. Eventually, if you want to be a professor, you usually do something called a postdoctoral research position. So this is you have your PhD and you get hired short term to actually get another mentor who will mentor you through more research, usually in slightly special skill or analysis or something. And you are paid for that position, but not a lot once again.
Mhm.
So you're probably paid anywhere from like 650. Honestly, maybe that's being a little even kind of generous, but like let's say 50 to $85,000 a year. And I think that can be really hard for people that didn't save for 5+ years to then go to a position where they're not maybe able to accrue the same savings as if they had worked a job that paid that much money before, for 5 years
Mhm.
also.
And in that role,
Um,
is it just like you're just doing research? Are you also teaching when you're in this postdoctoral role?
Yeah, good question. So it kind of depends on what you set up with your primary mentor. I know there's some situations that if you teach, you can make extra money, or you could teach at another university and make some extra money on top of that. Everyone knows pay is not great. The pay is not negotiable really either, which is, I remember someone told me, so my pay for my postdoc was on the low end of the range I gave you, which is crazy living in New York City. And I remember someone in academia being like, that's not negotiable. So what are you going to do? And it's true. I was like, is there room to negotiate? And they were like, no. Now in retrospect, sometimes it's hard to know what's the truth too. Like, is it non-negotiable? Why are people telling me it's non-negotiable? But the money comes from a grant. Sometimes that's all the money they have set aside to fund a postdoctoral researcher. So maybe there's some truth in that. But, now I always negotiate, of course. But yeah. And then I can only speak to being, working in academia after, but it starts from like 75 and goes up. Different schools have different sort of pay lines or pay grades. Schools of medicine, say you work as a nutrition professor at a school of medicine, for some reason, maybe they have better funding, their salaries are higher than those of public health, which is like a big bummer for me. But yeah, I will say it's always nice to like be able to. Something that I like about the job of an academic is every day is a little bit different. Like some days I teach, some days I do research, some days I take meetings, some days I have no meetings. I love clinical work. So I was really excited to, be able to engage in private practice work, to see clients and things like that. So you're able to supplement your income if you'd like from those ways. Obviously, it's not the only reason that people do clinical work and things like that, but it's nice to have the opportunities if you're both an RD and have your PhD.
I'm so glad. Like you said, this is not something that is talked about very often. I really appreciated the breakdown of the different stages and what that entails, what it looks like for you, what it looks like more broadly, and the opportunities that that even there's an option to be able to supplement some of your income with, whether it's private practice, or I'm sure there's folks that do other sorts of consulting. So that's super helpful. The conversation around like, oh, who knows what's true or not. The advocating for yourself seems really important, or even just asking that question. Even though the answer was not what you probably wanted to hear, I think it's still nerve-wracking to be like, well, I'm going to negotiate. I want to try to find a better way to support myself in this role. What advice would you give to other folks aspiring to be in academia or aspiring to be in kind of the research field, especially people of color? How to navigate those power structures, how to advocate for themselves if they are wanting to continue down this path?
Such a good question. So I think first, two things are always important for me to remember. And I think these sort of guide what I'm going to say after too. But just because something has never been done doesn't mean it cannot be done. And I think I fall into that all the time. I'm like, oh, but like they won't do this. Like, right, we're not allowed to do this. But I just need to remind myself. And I think it's a good message to put out there that just because it's been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. And the second thing is, just because this is the way it's done doesn't mean it's right. And those are the two things that I think if you sort of keep in the back of your mind, you can identify situations that maybe don't feel really good to you. When someone tells you, oh, they won't do this because they've never done it before. Okay, well, red flag, immediate red flag. Because why? You can change things. And then also like, well, they've always done it that way. Another immediate red flag, because maybe it's not the best way just because it was done that way. So I think those help me, and hopefully will help people like identify kind of those more immediate red flags. There is power in numbers. You sharing experiences with your peers can be really powerful. And they're like, oh, I'm experiencing this too. Or I was able to negotiate too. Or I was able to negotiate my postdoc salary. Here's what you can do. And I think sharing and talking openly about money, finances, numbers, all of that stuff is like so, so important, especially for us people of color. Sometimes we're just not privy to some of these things for so many different reasons. And I think it's really helpful to be able to share and have that power in numbers. And then if you want to advocate for something, oftentimes I would say there is a person in a PhD program, and I'm speaking specifically about mine, but also PhD programs probably in general, that you can go to. So when I say power in numbers, I'm kind of saying like, you can go to someone's office and be like, me and colleague 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or student 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feel this. And I feel like it's really empowering to have a group and community supporting you and just being able to like problem solve through there.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and I think continues to emphasize the impact of community, kind of like you were mentioning at the beginning of having that support system, not only for you making it through, but sharing experiences. And there's situations where I've like talked about salary transparency with coworkers, and oftentimes the people that are like, oh, you shouldn't, talk about salary. It's only to benefit this organization or this system. But the only way to be able to unmask the inequities that happen is for that transparency to happen. So even if it starts
Yeah.
within like a smaller group, like you said, of just like colleagues that you're talking to, just
Mhm.
better positions everybody. The impact that that has even trickles down, I think, because people are like, oh, did you hear about like the class of 20, whatever? They got together and they
Totally.
talked about this. We can do the same.
Yes, totally.
So, last question, looking back
Mhm.
on your career so far, is there a key moment or decision that you feel like shaped where you are today
Hmm.
or where you want to go? Because we didn't get a chance to talk
Yeah.
about like where you see yourself going.
Yeah, maybe I'll sprinkle that in. So the program that I described that I did with the Boys and Girls Club in New York City, or one of them, that was such an impactful program. And I have a specific moment too that I want to just maybe I can give some more details about. But
Yeah.
in that program, basically I was working with these 30 teens, and we had like 2 different sessions for the program that I ended up leading. And one thing no one tells you when you're in your PhD, you analyze the data, but you also run the program, and you also sign everyone in and give them
Oh,
snacks. So like you do the whole thing. So I was in it with these teens, and it was just such an amazing experience. We bonded, and really that's when also started to see the power of mentorship, just beyond like kind of, the classical, like your primary mentor, your principal or your teacher, all these things, just a kind of informal mentorship between teens and an adult that they're interacting with. So I thought that was an amazing experience. And we had a final wrap up celebration where everyone talked about what they enjoyed in the program. And I know some of them were like, okay, I didn't want to spend my whole entire summer doing this, but so many of them had so many fun things to say. They're like, my mom made me do the program. And I remember one of the students, she was like, can we take a selfie after like or during the program or the final celebration? It's actually a Snapchat now that I think about it. She's like, can we take a Snapchat selfie? I was like, okay, sure. And then she took a selfie of me and her, and then she wrote a caption, and she was like, my big sister.
oh,
And I straight up started, like, I was like tearing up. I was like, oh. And it really just showed me that research seems so clinical and bare. And oftentimes there is a lot of like not hands on, like some of the work that you and I are doing. And no one tells you research takes forever, like it's been years. Research takes so long, but some of it is really instant, and some of it is so gratifying and humanizing. And that just really made me be like, okay, I want to stay in this field of like education and academia and research because, yeah, there are just some really, really gratifying experiences.
yeah. I appreciate you humanizing it because I think the like picture I get of research academia is like, right, like you're in a lab, you're in front of an Excel spreadsheet, but the
Totally.
relationships that you're building, the mentorship that you're providing, the
Yeah.
snapshots that you're taking, um,
Yes.
that's so cool. Navika, thank you so much. Where can people connect with you, or if they have more questions? I feel like we had so many more things that we could have talked about. Where can people find you?
Yeah. Yes. I'm so happy to answer any questions or be a mentor or point people to better mentors too that are interested in nutrition, grad school, being a dietitian, private practice, anything. You can find me. Honestly, if you Google my name, and I'm sure there'll be a spelling somewhere, you can find my email. It's like on NYU's website, or you can find me on Instagram. I'm not super active, but if you DM me, I'll see it. It's navika.phd.rd. So yeah, I would be happy to connect with anyone.
Love it. Well, we'll include all of those details in our show notes, but it's been a pleasure catching up with you. Thank you so much for being
Yeah.
on today.
This was so fun. I feel like this was just us yapping away.
Yeah, we love
We're
to yap.
just
That's what the theme of this is yapping about
yes.
research.
Totally, totally. Super fun. Thanks so much, Deanna, and Diversified Dietetics.
Thanks for listening to Feed Me the Facts. We'd love for you to join the conversation by sending in your thoughts, questions, and voice notes to FMTF for Feed Me the Facts at diversifiedietetics.org. Your insights and experiences are invaluable to us, and we can't wait to include your voice in our discussion. This podcast was brought to you by Diversified Dietetics, a nonprofit community dedicated to increasing the racial and ethnic diversity in the field of nutrition and dietetics. You can find this and other episodes of Feed Me the Facts on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as on our website, www.diversifiedietetics.org. Stay up to date on what's happening in the DD community by subscribing to our monthly newsletter, The Squeeze. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. You can follow the DD community online on Instagram and Facebook at Diversify Dietetics.